Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like-minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but 2 of my last 3 trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Amateur Traveler Podcast, Episode 50.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Today on the show, we go to Washington, D.C.
The cabin has been pressurized for your comfort. In the unlikely event of a sudden loss of cabin pressure, oxygen masks will descend from the ceiling. Stop screaming, grab the mask, and pull it over your nose and mouth, and breathe normally. Yeah, that's going to happen.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler Podcast. For those of you who've been listening to the show for a long time, you'll recognize that introduction, which I haven't used in a while. Used to be one of 3 introductions that started the Amateur Traveler Podcast, and I thought I'd bring it back for this, the 1-year anniversary show. Thank you. No, thanks very much. Yeah, I know, I didn't think we'd get here either, but no, thanks. No. Okay, let's have some semblance of order here. But really, thank you for all the support that you've given me over the last year, and I can't believe I'm still doing the show and that I'm still having fun. And a special thanks to all of you who have provided some of the content for the show by coming on and talking about your travels. Those are really some of my most memorable and favorite shows, so I really do appreciate you taking the time to do that. And in honor of that being all that we're going to do about the silliness about the anniversary at this point, I want to bring back Julie from the Washington Travel Podcast. Well, I'd like to welcome back to the show Julie from the Washington Travel Cast. This time we've actually asked her to come back and talk about Washington, D.C., since we haven't done a show on Washington, D.C. yet. So welcome back.
Oh, thanks. I'm honored to be back.
I was telling Julie before we started recording that I think this is the first time we've had somebody come on twice. I suspect it's not the last time, but... So, as we talked about doing more with some domestic cities, because I'll be doing some international things, Washington, D.C. seems like a real obvious place to do. It's one of my favorite cities to visit, as long as I'm not visiting in the 7th day of an air stagnation alert, which I did one time.
Oh, yes.
So why don't we start with that, is when should people come to Washington, D.C.?
Well, there are 2 times when people should not come to Washington, D.C. The first one is the end of July and beginning of August, probably through all of August, which of course is when those air stagnation alerts occur. Mm-hmm. We are hot, we are humid, there are a lot of people, there are a lot of children, and it's a very crowded city tourist-wise. The second one is kind of iffy, and that is the Cherry Blossom Festival in late March, early April. While it's wonderful, and I go every year, it is indeed beats summer by a whole lot. It is the most crowded time. It is the biggest time, and on top of that, Congress is in session. At least in August, Congress isn't in session, so a lot of the regular federal workers have cleared out.
Okay.
My favorite time in the city is the fall. October, November, you can have museums like Air and Space all to yourself.
Wow.
It's not, we're fairly southern, so it doesn't get really, really cold until January. So you have halfway decent weather. October actually can be beautiful because we have lovely foliage in the area. And that's my favorite time, probably followed by those spring weeks outside of the Cherry Blossom Festival.
Mm-hmm. And you say it doesn't get a lot of cold weather. As I recall, it takes about an inch of snow to shut Washington, D.C. down or make it into a mess because it's not used to that kind of winter weather.
That is true as far as a lot of the government and such. If you're in the city, though, and you're near a metro, very little shuts the metro down.
Sure.
Inside, the point where it's inside. When you get out in the suburbs, it actually goes outside, and that can be a problem. But if you're in the city and you're metro accessible, you're golden most of the time.
So somebody's planning a trip to Washington, D.C. I guess a natural question would be, how long does it take to see Washington, D.C.? But I don't know that there's a finite answer to that.
I don't think there is. I haven't seen it yet. And I've been here for 25 years. Washington, D.C. is an incredibly rich city. If you just want to do the tourist core and maybe one or two offbeat things, you can do that in a week. But you can also come for targeted, weekends. I always think to really see the city, you really need 2 weeks.
Okay. If you only had a week, let's take that scenario first of all. You talked about the tourist core, and not everyone necessarily has an idea what that is. What's in your tourist core?
Okay, tourist core starts with the mall. The National Mall is this huge 2-mile-long grassy avenue that Pierre L'Enfant back in the 18th century designed to be like one of the grand boulevards in Paris. And it is lined by a number of really important institutions. On one end is the U.S. Capitol, where our legislature sits, where the Senate and the House of Representatives, both houses of the United States legislature. On the other end is the Lincoln Memorial, which is a huge Greek temple memorializing our President Abraham Lincoln, who was the one who kept the states together during the Civil War. He was in the mid 19th century for folks who are not up on their American history. And in the middle is the Washington Monument, which is the icon of Washington, this huge obelisk, Greek-type obelisk in the middle. It's lined by many of the Smithsonian Institution, the National Gallery of Art, a couple of other museums, and a number of memorials to veterans of various wars, other presidents, things like that. That really is the center, and you want to do that. You want to walk down it. The White House is just off it in one direction, the Jefferson Memorial in another direction. You want to do that, obviously. I always recommend, especially in the summer, that people consider doing the monuments in the evening. They're beautiful at sunset. They're open 24 hours a day, and there are Park Service personnel there till at least midnight. So it's a beautiful thing to do. It frees up your time during the day to visit some of the things that close at 5 or 6, like the Smithsonian, which pretty much all closes by about 5 or 6.
Now, before we get too much further, we gave a little plug to Pierre L'Enfant. We say we think that's actually the plaza he designed. He, as I recall, got into Snit and left with the plans, and the only reason we think we know what he laid out is that a freed slave who was working with him named Benjamin Banneker redrew it from memory. So we got to put a plug for Mr. Banneker there, too.
That's correct. We know that Pennsylvania Avenue fits L'Enfant's plan because it was pretty much done when he left.
Okay.
But we don't know about we're not certain about the mall, because that was still iffy in the Civil War. It was a hospital. I mean, they set up tents and all along the mall, and it was still pretty much a swamp.
Well, and we know Canal Street was a canal.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
or an open sewer, depending on which version you read.
Yeah, well, indeed, there was definitely an open sewer. The Ellipse, which is this large oval lawn area behind the White House, was the sewer for the White House during Lincoln's time, and in fact, that was a huge problem. He had a son who died of typhoid because of it.
So, of all the things to do in Washington, D.C., if you had to choose, and let's say you only had a week and you had to prioritize, which ones don't make the cut?
Which ones don't make the cut? Well, you're going to be surprised by this one, but our experience is, and I shouldn't say this because we're doing this next Saturday on our podcast, but the Washington Monument, for me, is overhyped.
To go up in the monument?
To go up in the monument, it is a long wait, especially in the summer. It might be okay in the fall. Long wait, especially in the summer. It is so smoggy that everything looks kind of fuzzy. Mm-hmm. There's almost as good a view from the post office pavilion, which is a block and a half away. Okay. Not nearly as high, but almost as good a view of the mall and such. But you can just walk into that, and you don't have to wait in line. And the Park Service personnel there, we were less than overwhelmed with. If it's important to you, by all means, do it. But it takes a lot of time out of your day to go up there and see kind of through the haze. I would say that one doesn't.
The post office isn't a bad stop anyway, because as I recall, there's you can also catch lunch there.
Yes, and because lunches on the mall are at a premium,
right?
Because they're in the museums, that's always a good thing to know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Washington Monument doesn't make the cut. Okay, any other surprises there?
No, not really. If the Air and Space Museum is a great museum, but it's often wall-to-wall people. Mm-hmm. So if you don't like crowds, you might think about that. But it's a great museum, and for me, I love that stuff. It's worth the cut. It's worth the crowds for me.
Now they have another exhibit much further away that doesn't get the crowds. All the
That's
things
right.
that don't show up there. Is that something you would recommend as an alternative to somebody who doesn't like crowds but still wants to see some of these historic?
Absolutely. That's called the Udvar Hazy Center, and you can actually get, you do have to pay for a bus trip, but you can get a ticket for the bus, and they will take you out there on a bus so that you don't have to have transport or anything. And it is an absolutely huge installation, and it has large planes. The Air and Space Museum is just great, but there's a limit to what size things it can. It does have some big things. It's got a Skylab, which walking through is really interesting. It has the Apollo-Soyuz pair, but there are big planes out at the Udvar Hazy Center, which is, by the way, near Dulles Airport. So if indeed you're flying in or out of Dulles, you could spend that last night in a hotel out by Dulles and see it on the way out of town or the way in town.
Okay. And then your other basic museums there in the mall, you've got the main Smithsonian building, you've got the National Archives, you've got the Natural History,
Don't forget the National Gallery of Art.
National Gallery of Art. And then
the new Indian Museum.
Exactly. And I haven't been to that.
Oh, that is a fascinating museum. It's more of a guided museum, kind of like the ones you see in Europe, where you can kind of walk through the museum rather than just picking. Most of our Smithsonian museums have a series, like the Air and Space Museum has a series of exhibits, and you can kind of pick and choose your exhibits. The American Indian Museum has 3, and it really is a tour through the culture. And if you go up and start and just come down through the culture, it makes a lot of sense. There's really an order to it, which is very interesting. Also, the cafe in the American Indian Museum, it's called Mitzitam Cafe, and that means let's eat in some language. I think it's the Onondaga or something like that. It is the if you're going to eat in a museum cafeteria, that's the one to eat at, because it's great value and they have all kinds of food from all kinds of native cultures. And I just love it.
Now, how much of the trip, how much do you have to plan ahead of time? I know it used to be at least that you could get in the White House, but you'd have to make that reservation ahead of time. I don't even know if they do that tour anymore.
Yeah, you can only get into the White House now with a group of at least 10 people.
Okay.
The White House, the security since September 11th, 2001 has pretty much closed that. They've opened it for the groups so that they can kind of pre-screen your groups. So if you're coming with Girl Scouts or with a scout troop or even with a big enough family, you can do that. You can also contact your congressman about getting into a group, but you generally need to do that about 6 months in advance.
Okay.
Pretty much everything else is you can get into. If you're coming during Cherry Blossom Week, make your reservations in advance. Other than that, you should be able to. Memorial Day, we went to the Washington Monument without tickets in advance.
Okay. First thing in the morning, or?
Well, yes. That is a big deal. All of the travel guides and our website, where we cover these things, will tell you when booths open, and you want to be there in advance. We got to the Washington Monument an hour prior to the booth opening, and we had no problem. My guess is we could have been there half hour prior to the booth opening. But all of these, if you don't want to do that, you can reserve in advance. I think they close about a week in advance. But for example, the Washington Monument gives 60% of its tickets out in advance and 40% on the day.
Oh, I did not realize that. Okay.
Yeah, and I think the same is true with Congress. Now, the Capitol building has just finished up a new visitor center. So I haven't been there yet. I don't know all the details of that, but we're going to be doing that fairly soon, before the end of summer, I think, on our podcast.
Okay. What would you do first when you get to town? You get to D.C. Where would you stay?
First? Where would I stay?
You don't stay on the mall.
Okay. No, you don't stay on the mall. I will tell you where I would stay with one caveat, and the caveat is that I am a budget and backpacker traveler.
Perfect.
As a rule. Where I would like to stay, it would be the Hotel Harrington. Hotel Harrington is a not terribly up-to-date, independent hotel. It has rooms all the way from a tiny, itsy-bitsy little queen room for, I think, $90 a night, all the way up to a room that will sleep 6 in 4 different beds, and you can bring in a cot if you need an extra one for groups. They market to groups a lot, to European travelers.
So this is not where your out-of-town lobbyists are staying?
This is not where your out-of-town lobbyists are staying. But it's the least expensive motel, and it is 2 blocks from Metro Center, 2 blocks from the White House, 2.5 blocks from the mall. It is in the middle of everything. And you can walk. You may not even need Metro if you're coming for a short time and you're going to stay at the Hotel Harrington. So its location cannot be beat. If you're on the other end of the spectrum, the place to stay is the Willard Hotel, which ironically is about 2 blocks from the Hotel Harrington. This is one of the most expensive, one of the toniest hotels, most luxury hotels in Washington. It's also where Martin Luther King wrote his I Have a Dream speech. It's where the Battle Hymn of the Republic was written. It's where Lincoln stayed before his inauguration, and where John Wilkes Booth stayed before when he was plotting Lincoln's assassination. So it has a huge amount of history. But it's not cheap. It's one of those, if you have to ask how much it costs, you can afford it.
Okay. And if someone wanted, actually, let's put this another way too. If somebody wanted to start listening to the Washington Travelcast, should we start at number 1, or is there your best episode that has the best hidden secret of Washington D.C.? Which one?
One of the best hidden secrets that's in ours is our National Arboretum episode. But I will point out that we have an index on our site by site. So you can find out which episodes, for example, have something about the Washington Monument in it or something about the Air and Space Museum in it. So it's all indexed there. But the National Arboretum, which is a large garden in the northeast of Washington, D.C., most locals don't know about it, and it's a library. It's a national library of important plants. Okay. Maintained by the federal government, and it's got all kinds of things. It's got a section called Fern Valley, which highlights indigenous plants on the East Coast. And you walk through this, and you walk through a New England-style forest, and a Mid-Atlantic forest, and kind of towards Carolinas, and go all the way down to subtropical forests. They have in the spring, beautiful dogwood and azalea gardens. They have incredible oriental gardens, and they have the National Bonsai Museum. I bet you didn't know we had a National Bonsai
Museum. You've got me there. I did not know that.
Yeah, that's a big one. There are also a number of really important religious sites in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. Most people don't know that Washington, D.C. is a pilgrimage city for the Roman Catholic Church. We have not only the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, but we have a Franciscan monastery that replicates sites from the Holy Land. So you can see a replica of the shrine in Bethlehem, and a replica of the shrines and memorials on Gethsemane and such in Jerusalem. There's a whole bunch of things there. There's a replica of the grotto at Lourdes, and it was built in the 19th century by monks who were concerned that people would never be able to see these things, because at that time people didn't go to Europe. It was so expensive. People who had any kind of health issue couldn't. So they wanted to bring this to people, and it's really a fascinating site. The Episcopal Church has their national cathedral, which is actually an interdenominational church. There are national Jewish, Islamic, all kinds of religions have central national churches. That's very interesting to do. Another thing that's real important to do if you come to Washington is get out of museums, get out of exhibits, get out of buildings, and go and visit the neighborhoods, because Washington isn't just a tourist, it isn't just the capital of the United States, and it's a vibrant city on its own. And we have neighborhoods like Adams Morgan. It's a fascinating neighborhood, and we have a podcast going up in a few weeks on it, but came out of desegregation. There were two elementary schools. One was white, named Adams, and one was named Adams, and one was black, named Morgan. And those two elementary schools joined kind of to symbolize the hope that desegregation had. And Washington, D.C., the city itself is an extremely diverse city. That neighborhood has been home to many floods of immigrants, so that there are Hispanic influences there. There are all kinds of African influences there, and you can eat. There's a restaurant row along 18th Street in Adams Morgan where you can eat from all corners of the globe, and the restaurants are wonderful. They're inexpensive. And it's just a fantastic and fascinating place to go.
Interesting. Georgetown is the only one of the neighborhoods that I really know anything about.
Yeah, another one is the Penn Quarter, which is downtown, off mostly 7th Street, 8th Street, 6th Street, around Chinatown. And you may have been to Chinatown. That's another place with wonderful restaurants. But it's becoming an incredibly thriving theater scene. Washington, D.C. has almost 60 professional theater companies and venues, believe it or not. And theater happening most of the year. August is a little dry, but,
only
not
from
to mention,
theater, not from weather.
Right. The Kennedy Center, which of course is the national arts venue, they have a concert every day at 6 p.m. that is free, an hour-long concert in their main hall. And it's wonderful. You just go there. In fact, my husband and I were there on Monday.
And that's just a quick trip from the metro, as I recall.
There's a shuttle. There's a free shuttle. You can pick up a free shuttle at the Foggy Bottom metro station, and they will take you to the front door. They will bring you back. All of it free. That's an important thing about Washington.
I was going to say
everything is free.
Now, some of the tours cost, as I recall. Well, certainly the private ones, but so much is free in Washington D.C.
Yeah, and there are a number of museums. There are museums that are private museums, and some of them are really good. There's a spy museum. How can you come to Washington and not, take a spy tour or do the spy museum? Excellent museum, but it is not free. The Holocaust Museum is not free. And there are a couple of major art museums unassociated with the Smithsonian. Although I have to say, we will be visiting them, but I would go to the Smithsonian first. The Smithsonian and the National Gallery of Art. The National Gallery of Art has an incredible collection, and I would go there first. And then, if you're really into art, the Phillips collection has an incredible Impressionist collection, including one of Rodin's most famous works, and there are a couple of others that are really big. But we have a half a dozen free, fantastic art museums that you can walk through.
Monuments. We didn't talk that much about monuments. Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, my favorite actually is one that's a little off the beaten path and that people may not know about. It's fairly new. It's the FDR monument that's Franklin Delano
right
Roosevelt.
there on the mall, as I recall.
It's actually off the tidal basin.
Oh, it's off the tidal basin, so it's opposite the Jefferson.
It's kind of opposite the Jefferson,
okay.
And Roosevelt, of course, was our president during World War II. His years in and out are the same as Adolf Hitler's, which kind of interestingly. But the monument is set up as 4 outdoor rooms because he was the only president to serve 4 terms, and they address the themes of those 4 terms. And there's a lot of art in this monument. And a lot of symbolism. It's really, really an incredible, very rich monument. Compared to some of them that are just a statue with a building around it, this has got all these different themes going on, and it's really a very interesting monument.
And one of the newer ones, if not the newest.
And one of the newer ones. I think the World War II Veterans Memorial, which is between the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial, is newer. And there's a small monument that's also very interesting to the Japanese who died in World War II and to those who were interred by us in World War II, which is right off Constitution Avenue near the Capitol, but a little ways back. It's sometimes a little bit hard to find. But that's a very interesting one, and it's not really out of your way if you're walking along there.
So there are so many things to see in Washington. Certainly we recommend your podcast as one resource. Any other good resources for how do you plan a trip when there's so many choices in terms of what to do with your time?
Well, there are a lot of really good websites. And I don't know all of the URLs, but DC Cultural Tourism, I think .org is one, which has a lot of the cultural stuff. There is the National Geographic Travel Guide is my favorite travel guide. Obviously, I have a lot of them because I do a podcast associated with Washington, and I'm always pouring through them to see if there's some fact I'm missing, that I missed. But that's really big. Metro's site. If you come to Washington, the number one tip, the absolute number one tip, is do not bring a car into the city. When Pierre L'Enfant designed these avenues and these circles and these grand vistas, he was doing it for horses. And it does not translate well to the automobile, unfortunately. And locals do not drive.
And not to mention just finding a place to park, as I recall in Washington.
Well, yes, and parking is extremely expensive. If you drive in and you want to park in the Capitol Hill area, you are looking at a minimum of $15, and that's if you park at Union Station, which, by the way, is the best place to park if you must drive in. But don't bring a car unless you're arriving by car, essentially. Mm-hmm. There are times when you might want to do a day trip out to some place like Mount Vernon or out to Virginia wine country, and we actually sometimes do a feature on our podcast called Worth Renting a Car For, and that's actually what I recommend. There are a lot of inexpensive car rental places in the area, and you can rent a car for $25, $30, $40 a day, and use that car for that day and you've saved money over trying to bring it in. But the traffic is horrendous. There's very little place to park. Some of the, when I said the Hotel Harrington, they have a parking lot that they use, but again, it's I think $17 a day. You haven't saved as much if you're going to spend $17 a day for to park a car you're not really going to use. The subway system is clean, it's safe, it's easy to use, and they have a fantastic website that helps you plan all of your trips.
Any last tips for someone coming to Washington, D.C.?
Get off the mall. Do the mall. Do all that stuff. Get off the mall, see the neighborhoods, and listen to Washington Travelcast to get your tips.
And the URL for that is?
www.washingtontravelcast.com. And we have pictures. We have lots of picture albums, so you can kind of do a virtual visit while you're getting ready.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your obvious wealth of knowledge about Washington, D.C. with us. That's a great introduction to the city, and obviously, for more information, you have the URL. Thanks very much for coming, Julie.
Right. Well, thank you.
I put up links to most of the places that Julie mentioned on the show notes at amateurtraveler.com, so check that out. Feel free to comment on the episode or send me an email at host@amateurtraveler.com. To comment on the episode, put comments in at the show notes or go to the discussion boards and post a comment. Please remember to vote for the Amateur Traveler. That'd be a nice first birthday present for the show at Podcast Alley, Podcast Pickle, Yahoo Podcasts, and all your favorite podcast directories. And also remember to vote for it at the Podcast Awards. If you think this is one of the finer podcasts, I would certainly appreciate a nomination. And links to all those, again, on the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. This show is pre-recorded. If all goes well, it will go live July 14th while I'm in Africa. If all doesn't go well, it'll go live after that. I've been having some server problems, so hopefully that won't get in the way. Thanks very much for listening.
The best and the brightest, served up daily by the sharpest minds in content delivery, Podshow and Limelight.